Computer, activate holodeck and begin a new simulation.
Please specify parameters.
First, we're going to need a setting. How about the bridge of the USS Enterprise?
There have been 5 Federation ships with that name. Please specify by registry number.
NCC 1701. No bloody A, B, C, or D. Alrighty, now I've got my ship. I need to populate it with some characters. So, computer, create for me a technical guru who can keep this podcast going. Name the character Chris McGee.
Please state the nature of the philosophical emergency.
Alright, now we need a character who is a major in philosophy, who understands all the ins and outs of all the high-end stuff we're going to be talking about. Create a second character, name him Ben McLean.
Okay, so this is the part where I say something funny, except I couldn't think of anything, so let's just skip to the part where you laugh at it.
And now we need another someone to give us a broader perspective and catch all the little bits and pieces that we miss, because we're going to end up missing a lot. We always do. So give me a third character, and let's call her Ash Hume.
Okay, first let's lay out some ground rules here. What happens on the holodeck stays on the holodeck, because nobody wants to clean up a mess like that.
Oh.
Gee, now I'm wishing I added Riker to this program. No, computer, do not add Riker. One awesome beard is enough, and I've got that covered. So, let's begin recording Trekosophy, the Star Trek Philosophy Podcast.
Program complete. Enter when ready.
So, I've always wondered, is there a limit to how many characters the holodeck can render at once?
256.
Probably not.
Yeah, I'd probably have a...
I mean, for actual characters, probably as many as can fit in the holodeck, but...
256.
65,539.
Because if it was higher than 256, it would run out of numbers on its 16-bit variables.
Well, no, after that you start getting issues with frame rate. And
right.
So, anywho, our inane ramblings this time around have taken us to the holodeck because we've started playing video games again. Yay us. Only now it turns out the video games have really gone places. I know we're going to be talking mostly about virtual reality, but I'd like to contribute something to this and reminisce about my own childhood. Who remembers Pong?
You mean the original release of Pong?
Yes.
The home console version?
No, the original arcade bar top game version. The first arcade. Well, I mean, you want to call it the home console version too, yeah, but the birth of video games was Pong.
Yeah, that's something my mom had at one point when she was a little girl. Or at least that's what my grandfather says. But I certainly wouldn't be old enough to remember the original release of Pong. Wow.
Yeah, we had it
older than you. You must be a lot older than you sound.
We had it on our computer, which is like a Spectra video, but more often I was more inclined to play those, text-based adventure games and things like Alien Invaders, Space Invaders, and stuff like that.
Oh, Zork. I love Zork.
Yes. Well, before we get eaten by a Gru, we're going to fast forward a little bit. It all started with Pong, those simple graphics and monochromatic display. In fact, Atari was the first video game to give color to arcade games by putting colored cellophane over the screen instead of, programming actual colors into the little display thing. Eventually you got actual color, and then you got 8-bit, then you got 16-bit, then you got 64-bit, then you got whatever we're at now. And we're approaching a point where computer technology for graphics rendering, for storytelling and all that has reached epic proportions. That line between playing a video game to push buttons and doing an interactive movie is getting more and more blurred. The stories are more complex. The characters are more complex. Your ability to interact with the characters is more complex, but we're still reaching a limit on what we can do with computers as far as computer games. And now people are looking, how can we breach that? How can we make the game smarter, make the AI work better, make the game look more realistic? And the one way to make it more realistic is to give it an extra dimension.
Well, wait, unless it's a licensed Star Trek title, in which case they're looking for how can we put out the cheapest product we possibly can that technically qualifies as a game.
Yes. Hey, now let's not go bashing the Star Trek games. They are pretty cool, some of them.
Well, okay, Elite Force and Elite Force 2 were awesome.
Yeah.
Starfleet Command, come on.
Well,
Okay,
I mean, there are several that are. I mean, even in the adventure game genre, there was Star Trek 25th Anniversary and Star Trek Judgment Rights. Both of those.
Yeah,
were
but those were
pretty good.
ages ago. I'm talking about the latest ones.
What has there been recently, anyway?
Star Trek 2009.
Which was the 09 game. Wasn't that basically
crap?
Cash in?
It was Galaga, right?
It's just a really bad, really cheap video game that was made by accountants.
Yeah, it was a cash in to tie in with the film.
And, I don't have anything wrong with that. It just makes me want to put Robert Downey Jr. on Star Trek at some point so he can actually say, that man is playing Galaga. He thinks nobody noticed, but we all did, because that's what the 09 game was. And then there's Star Trek Online, which is focusing more on the stories.
Okay, as MMOs go, Star Trek Online is all right. It's not horrible. I can give them that Star Trek Online was at least competent.
Yeah, I mean, but now we're getting to a point where people want to push the envelope. The graphics are pretty good. They got video games doing that 3-screen setup to give you that 120-degree field of vision going on. I'm pretty sure we're only 5 years away from having 3D computer monitors where you wear the funky glasses, and
I'm thinking, well, that's what we're supposed to talk about today is virtual reality.
Yep.
But how many years away are we? Well, there's a bunch of stuff I could say here to try to get us going on VR. I think I might say first, though, that when it comes to video games, there's two things you have to keep in mind. The first is that better hardware or better capabilities doesn't necessarily equal better visuals. There's been this horrible tendency in the AAA industry, meaning the games that are made with big budgets, that they're like coding in a garage. Who does that? With big companies and big teams, the main video games, right? That's what AAA means. And there's been this horrible tendency in the AAA industry to simply paint everything brown and then call it gritty and realistic. Now, I know when I go outside, everything isn't brown. And I've seen videos of combat, and okay, maybe it's a little more brown than ordinary life, but nowhere near this crap. So a lot of the new graphics, even though they have had higher fidelity, have had suckier visuals. So going forward, we have to think not just about better graphics, generically. We have to think about how to use better, how to use the graphics better. So that's, I think, the next frontier is some better design, or at least getting out your box of crayons and coloring it a little bit more like Super Mario 64 or whatever, where it actually has multiple colors and not just various shades of brown. Anyway, though, but getting on towards... the other thing is, as a general principle of video games, that corollary to this one, better graphics capabilities in every console generation of video game consoles, better graphics capabilities do not sell consoles. Every generation, the console with the best capabilities has not been the top seller. In every generation, the console with the best titles, especially the best launch titles and the best exclusive titles, has been the best seller. So we have to think not just about, ooh, how cool is VR, but we have to think about what can we do with it. All right. So those are some of the things we'd have to explore here.
Right. And something else to bear in mind as well. You had mentioned how better graphics does not necessarily translate to a better game. And I agree. Like you had mentioned, painting everything with a brown tint because they wanted to make it gritty or realistic does not make it gritty or realistic. We should not lose sight of the fact that a lot of these titles, and we're getting a little bit off track of virtual reality. We'll get back to it in a moment. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that a lot of these game titles are created with a vision by the producer or the developers of the game, in the same vein that films are created into the vision of the director. He's the one that decides how the film will look. Not just, where the cameras go, but the lighting and the color grading and so forth and so on. The same thing happens with video games, especially these AAA title video games. There is usually a creative director, the person who says, I want this scene to look like this, and I want it to have this brown smear tint on it, or whatever. So there's a difference between what we expect to see in the game and what the director intends for us to see. So we can't just say, well, the game's, they're trying to make it look gritty and real. They're just using their vision of what it may be hyper real or hyper gritty or something like that. But I'm giving it that brown tint. I don't know if I'm making much sense here, but
yeah. Well, the idea that video games style comes out as the result of an individual's creative direction, the way it is argued that directors influence films,
kind of like the movie Sin City, for example.
It's true in some cases, but it is a lot more true for some studios than others. Mm-hmm. Ubisoft, who makes the Assassin's Creed games, I think they tend to do more of a design by committee kind of thing. And so some games really don't have a single creative director you can point to.
Yeah, that's true.
But indie studios almost always do. So indie studios, just because of the nature of an indie studio, usually it's either one guy or just a few guys or a very small team. You can see the hand of the individual creator a lot more clearly in the case of indie games than in AAA games. But I think we need to get more towards VR here.
Yeah, and actually that I almost want to mention, today's graphics technology has advanced to the point where more of the director's creative vision can come through in the games. Whereas earlier games back in the 80s and 90s, there wasn't that much they could do creatively in terms of being able to change the look or feel of a game. They could do some, but not a whole lot. For example, there was a VR system in the mid 90s called Virtuality. I don't know if any of you remember this, but it was a system that was set up where you put on this 50-pound headgear that covered your eyes, and you held this sort of joystick-like controller in your hand, and you were locked in a little cage, a round cage-like thing to keep you from falling out. And he's looking it up now. And the graphics inside were less than stellar. I mean, less than Tron graphics, pretty much. They were awful. And the lag from moving your head side to side or up and down was awful. You would move your head, and then maybe a half a second later, which is a long time in terms of lag, the vision would move correspondingly.
What was this called again?
Virtuality.
Oh, okay.
I will link you the...
I'm looking at the cages now.
I think I might have tried that once.
Yeah, they went around to some arcades back then to show off their technology. And it
wasn't
was awful.
it wasn't actually as impressive as you'd hope that kind of a demo and that kind of a setting
We
would
could call
be.
this the first age of VR, the dark ages.
Let me sort of give you guys a sort of a picture from somebody who follows tech news, of where we're at.
It has gotten so much better now. Not virtuality, but
Well, I was going to talk about the business side of things. If you follow tech news is a lot like political news, except that instead of a simple 2-party system, it's more like an 8 or dozen party system. So it's like following political news for like England or something, where they've got a whole bunch of parties.
England has 2 or 3 main parties. I think UKIP's getting a bit bigger.
Well,
but
who's got like 8 parties? Japan's got like 8 parties. Okay, so it's like following Japanese political news, I guess. Although things are so weird in Japan that
they change prime ministers every year or 2. That's because they've got so many parties and.
Well, okay. Anyway, my point is there are certain big players that you watch, but instead of just 2, there's like 8 of them, and. Let's see, over time, we see, this stuff comes out in cycles. So there's like, the Super Nintendo was a cycle in the 90s, and then the N64 was the first 32-bit, cycle, and then the PlayStation 2 would be the first 32 to 64-bit cycle, and then we had the PlayStation 3 was definitely a 64-bit cycle, and we're still on 64-bit right now. But so every few years they come out with a new console, and it's sort of like they all put in money into different technologies, hoping that they'll get a profit from that. But sometimes the bet, sometimes they get wiped out. It's like a poker game, So back in the 90s, Nintendo put a whole bunch of money on developing a virtual reality system called the Virtual Boy. Trouble is, 1990s technology sucked for virtual reality. It just wasn't ready yet. So the product they came out with, it was pretty sucky. Is it a portable system? Definitely not. Is it, more fun than playing your home video game system without, that isn't your regular home video game system like the Super Nintendo? No. So it's definitely in between those two. And it just wasn't compelling at all. And it only could display one color, the Virtual Boy.
That's right.
They put a ton of money into that, and they lost a bunch of money on that. And that was around that time VR, was promising. Around the year 2000, we're all going to have.
Why.
What?
Oh, sorry, finish your thought there. Sorry.
Oh, well, the promise back then was, around the year 2000, we're all going to have VR. We're going to have these VR goggles that let us turn our head and look around like we're inside the movie Tron. We'll have Tron graphics, but it'll be in VR, and that never happened, or we'll be playing Doom in VR, and that never happened. And so it took another 10 years before people would even look. Well, it's really 20 years now. It took another 10 years before people would even look at starting to develop VR again, and another 20 years before, VR might actually happen. But then, John Carmack, the guy behind id Software, who developed the great graphical engines behind Doom and Quake and so on, left to develop the Oculus Rift, which is the front runner in the VR industry. It hasn't hit shelves yet, but it's the main thing.
Before you get into that real quick, I wanted to touch on what you mentioned about the Virtual Boy.
Sure.
And by the way, anyone who is curious about the Virtual Boy, go look up the Angry Video Game Nerds review of it. Hilarious and spot on.
Yeah.
Virtual Boy actually, it was not portable at all. The advertisements for it made it seem like it was portable. No way. Not unless you had duct tape. And yes, it was one color. It was not really virtual by any means. except maybe the loosest possible definition. The only way that you could possibly call it virtual is that it was 3D in a way. It used lasers. And at the time, there was only one color of lasers, red. So it really messed with your eyes. Everything was red and black. And the reason why they called it virtual, you already mentioned this, Ben, is virtual reality was supposed to be the new hotness then. And so they wanted to cash in on that by calling their device Virtual Boy, again, to combine virtual reality and the Game Boy, which was super popular at the time.
Yeah, and it definitely wasn't that.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't what was advertised really at all. And
had like maybe a total of 5 or 6 games for it. That's it. The entire library.
Well, yeah, but that's because it wasn't selling. I mean, they didn't keep developing titles for it because it wasn't selling. I mean, you can't blame them for not having titles. They had
they had a bucket loads of money into that marketing campaign.
They had a decent number of launch titles. They were pretty sucky, most of them, but they had a decent number of launch titles. But still, I mean, it wasn't selling. It wasn't gonna sell, and so the less money they spend on developing more titles for it, the better for that, as far as their bottom line's concerned. Well, anyway, but
back to the Oculus Rift.
The big push for virtual reality in the 90s, I think, was in many ways sort of spawned by the success of Doom. Doom brought us this fast-paced 3D gameplay that was just like nothing anybody had ever seen before, except in other titles by the same company that were leading up to Doom. John Carmack is like this genius guy who, he comes up with new graphical innovations over and over. He has new graphics engines that do incredible things people thought were impossible until he writes the engine that does it. And then he's more interested in the actual, game engine than making a game with it, So Carmack pretty much realized after a while, with the release of id Tech 5, which is behind Rage and Wolfenstein the New Order, that graphics engines aren't really going anywhere anymore, and id Software isn't really going anywhere anymore. It's coasting. We know in principle what can be done and what can't now. It's not the Wild West it was in the 90s. So he went looking for a new project, and he decided, I'm going to make VR happen. And he got on Kickstarter with the Oculus Rift, which is, basically, let's make VR happen. Sci-fi has been promising it for 40 years. That's how long the Israelites spent in the wilderness, so should be about time to enter the promised land of VR now, Well, that generated an incredible amount of media hype because good marketing plus John Carmack's behind it equals OMG, please take my money. And then, so a whole bunch of other companies are like, oh, look what's happening here. It made a gazillion dollars or whatever. We should have a product like that too, so we can get in on this market, and stay relevant, with the new tech. So they all start developing their own. Sony starts the Project Morpheus. A bunch of people leave Valve to create Cast AR. Google starts Google Glass. Canon starts Nreal.
One person left, really.
They had a few different people who were former Valve employees that moved. But yeah, their lead was from Valve, is what the sort of media really picked up on, of course. And so all these different companies are in various ways trying to get into this market, but nobody knows whether it's going to sell. Are they all going to be like Nintendo Entertainment Systems that fly off the shelves? Or are they going to be Virtual Boys that, that look cool, have cool ads, and then no one actually buys one because they suck? Or will one of them rush to market with something that looks like what sci-fi has been promising and then isn't, and then ruins the market for everybody else who gets in even if their products do work. There's all these issues, all these complicated business issues going on here, and it's it's hard to tell in advance whether is this all hype or is it really going to sell? Is virtual reality just a geek fad, or is it going to be a real thing that everybody uses? So those are the questions that are in front of us right now, I'd say. Well, there's a few companies that think, so far as we know, they pretty much think, nah, it's not happening. And the big three of those are Amazon, Apple, and Nintendo. All three of those companies have been like, we aren't wasting money on this. It's like at the beginning it's like folding at the beginning of the hand. You paid the blind, you got your card, you're like, this is crap, I fold. That's where they're at. So they're out for now. And Google might be out too, because Google Glass doesn't seem to have worked out. So it looks like right now it's a big race between Sony, Google, Valve, and possibly Microsoft. Oh, wait. Sony, Google, Valve, Facebook, and possibly Microsoft.
And actually, Google Glass isn't completely out, by the way. They just are calling it into their Explorer series of Google Glass.
Yeah, but
they're going to do some retooling, and it will likely resurface, probably in a different form later on.
For right now, it really looks like they've hit some bumps where they are going to be really far behind all these other guys. The thing is, it takes time to develop this kind of stuff. This is new technology. It takes time to develop it. And just having a lot of money doesn't mean you can get your product done. It's like, how like a woman can have a newborn baby ready in 9 months, right? But that doesn't mean that two women can do it in 4.5 months. It still takes the same amount of time, even if you have more resources, because it just takes that long. And so a lot of these companies are looking at that. So in this race, Facebook, who bought Oculus Rift, is clearly in the lead. There is a good chance they will be to market this year. Close behind them is Sony, who have their Project Morpheus that's been kind of trailing behind the Oculus Rift. They might be out maybe 6 months after Oculus Rift if they're lucky. And then all these other guys are behind them. And Microsoft just barely got started, and it's going to take Microsoft at least a good 2 or 3 years.
Actually, last I heard, HoloLens was slated for, at least in developer form, it is slated for this year.
Oh, yeah. Microsoft will have a developer kit out this year, but they won't have anything. They won't have anything for consumers for at least 2 or 3 years. I mean, it's going to be a while on that HoloLens thing.
What was it? Back in the 50s, dude wrote a book, Seduction of the Innocent, talking about how comic books were subversive literature that was contaminating the youth. And it was something that got turned into a joke, but it came up again with video games. And how do video games influence violence of people who play them? Especially since so many video games are action-oriented. As video games have gotten more realistic, you've got a whole rating system where, if the grim and gritty warfare in modern warfare is a little too realistic, we shouldn't have kids playing this and exposing them to it. VR adds a layer to that because, we're talking about putting on goggles and being one step removed from actual holodecks. The line between reality and fiction gets blurred. Is there an issue with contamination of youth and turning us all into crazed video game fueled murderers?
Well, this sort of argument has been around for ever, probably. I mean, ever since the beginning of any sort of entertainment for mankind. Feature films, movies. I mean, before they had rating systems, parents were wondering whether or not their kids should watch these violent movies. Is it affecting their behavior? Gangster rap in the 80s, 90s has also been blamed for it. And now, of course, because, video games, because you're in control of the person doing the violence. Now, that's even more influential than movies or any other media. And now, VR, because it surrounds your vision and it's 3D and you're even more into it, etc. All this has happened before and will always happen again, to coin a phrase.
Well, on the one hand, Jack Thompson's an idiot. And everybody knows Jack Thompson's an idiot. So he got disbarred, okay? I think we're about done, with that guy. And your grandmother doesn't know what she's talking about, obviously. So you don't have to worry about that.
Well,
but here's my concern about this. Any criticism whatsoever of the content of any new form of media, and the content, not the form of media, but the content. Any concern whatsoever about content is dismissed as extreme censoring puritanism of that variety, no matter how reasonable it is. I mean, don't you think there should be, maybe we should have, as artists, we should think about, maybe having at least some redeeming qualities to what we're doing, and maybe some avenue for criticism of what is being done. I mean, without that constantly being, this has been around forever, well, yeah, but has it always been wrong or only sometimes? This type of argument. Has this type of argument always been wrong or only sometimes been wrong? I think it's only sometimes been wrong. Sometimes it's been right. Now, like I said, I play video games, including, violent ones. I don't think it's that big of a deal. But on the other hand, I think it is somewhat of an aesthetic concern when all these titles that are just filled with senseless violence to the point where violence no longer has the dramatic impact that it ought to have in order to tell good stories. Like, oh, somebody got killed, big deal, it happens all the time, they'll get another life. We do lose something when we do that too much. When we go overboard with that, and there's a lot of games that have been going overboard with that. And I think there are ways to maybe tone that aspect of it down without losing our good mechanics.
I think you're talking about desensitization to violence. Okay. And this has also been disproved. Well, I can't say disproved, but no study has ever shown that there is a correlation between violence in video games and violence in, say, teenagers or any other
I'm not
youth.
talking about desensitization to real life violence. I'm talking about excessive violence in video games, desensitizing you to violence in video games. I mean, it becomes meaningless so that you can no longer use it to tell a compelling story. Like, let's say we wanted to make a video game that explores the events surrounding Brutus killing Caesar. Or wasn't it Brutus killed Caesar?
Yeah, Brutus and a bunch of other people.
Right. Let's say you wanted to do that. You wanted to tell a really engaging story. But the thing is, how could you make that compelling when God of War has people in togas getting killed left and right?
Yeah, Ben does have a point. When you try to tell the Caesar story, you're going to end up with, from the creators of Fruit Ninja, Et2, the new tablet app. But in defense of all the fruitcakes, and yes, they are fruitcakes, we are in video games technology trying to push the boundaries and blur the lines between what's real and what isn't. With a lot of this technology, like Google Glass, for example, it would not be hard to have a little Google Glass app where if your Google Glass is out and somebody else's Google Glass is out, everybody wearing Google Glass is either tagged as red team or blue team, and you've got laser tag in the streets.
Oh yeah, that would be so fun. I would love that.
It would be absolutely.
Yeah.
But then you start really you start playing with I hesitate to use the phrase meddling with forces we can't comprehend, but when you start twisting with reality a little bit and making your fiction as realistic as possible and add that extra element to it, what is going to happen to us?
Well, and I don't want to steer this conversation totally towards violence in video games, but I will say this much to your point, Ben, regarding desensitization in a fictional medium such as video games. Yes, in Call of Duty, you're shooting tons of people at a time, but these are essentially faceless people that you don't know. They don't have a story to you. Whereas if you're reading, if you watch the play, with Julius Caesar, you get the whole backstory behind him. You learn about him before he is murdered by Brutus. So you do feel something there because he's not just a faceless person who gets killed in a video game. It's all about telling the story. And if you can make the person compelling enough, if the story is well told, then you will feel a connection with the character that dies near the end.
Well, the trouble with that is that the mechanics of video games that we have can often be at odds with the kinds of stories we might like to tell. For example, in the Final Fantasy series, let's look at Final Fantasy V, right? You have characters can die due to mechanical reasons in the battle system. They run out of hit points, so they die. But they can come back to life with Final Fantasy VII works too. They can come back to life by using a Phoenix Down, right? But then when you want a character to, die, it doesn't make any sense anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
I'd suggest that
you can't tell me that you didn't play Final Fantasy VII and think, why didn't they just use a Phoenix Down?
I'll admit,
everybody thought that.
Yeah, everyone thought that, I think.
And that's the problem I'm bringing up.
Because story, that's why.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I would suggest that one of the reasons that the death of Julius Caesar doesn't lend itself well to video games is because it's only one event.
No, it's not. I'm sorry.
It was no. I mean the actual murder itself. I mean, I know there was a huge lead up to it and everything like that.
Yeah, and all kinds of politics and whatnot.
As far as that goes, as far as the death of Julius Caesar, it was.
Oh yeah, but it's like saying, the Lincoln assassination isn't just about, the president decided to go to the theater one day. Well, no, there's more to it than that.
But the lead up, everything that happens, even everything that happened before doesn't necessarily lend itself very well to gameplay. Whereas something like the Battle of Actium might lend itself a bit better because you've got sort of.
What was that? Battle of what?
Battle of Actium.
You're going to have to explain that.
I'm afraid I don't recognize that off the top of my head either.
The Battle of Actium was the battle fought between Octavian and Antony.
Right. That is ringing a bell. Oh man, I need to know my Roman history better than I do.
Or Shakespeare.
So things like that are more, I guess, drawn out in a way where more things are happening.
Okay. But
Might lend themselves better to gameplay.
My basic point, though, I think is I think a fairly sound aesthetic concern to have there. It's not so much a moral concern as it is like it's like in what's it? All those action movies. All those action movies where like Arnold Schwarzenegger, gets shot. But that doesn't stop him. He just keeps fighting on, even though he's shot. It makes no physical sense, but he just keeps on going, And so you're like, him getting shot after that becomes no big deal. And so all the threat goes away. And, so all the significance, when you overuse any given thing, all of its significance drains away. And I think we've gotten to a place with violence in video games where it no longer has any kind of real significance.
It doesn't automatically have real significance, but I'd argue that the possibility for significance is still there. I mean, sure, Stallone and Schwarzenegger were, millions of bullets flying. Stallone did a little bit better with making it realistic than Schwarzenegger because he'd have to do the whole, dump gunpowder in it and set fire to the wound to seal it up thing. But both of them really went into this bizarre superhero territory, and everything changed with Die Hard, which was pretty crazy for being an over-the-top action movie. Dude pretty much blew up a building with nothing but a wife beater and a 32, and
9mm actually.
Okay, 9mm, yeah.
I have the same
gun. And yet he's still. I mean, they found a way to make it. They basically took what had turned into a trope and made something amazing out of it that has a good, compelling story.
Okay,
so it
I
doesn't
need to actually
automatically.
Watch that.
You've never seen Die Hard?
Yeah, hold them down, Ben.
Not the whole.
Sorry, Bill.
Not the
Why
whole.
am I?
Not the whole
channeling...
way through. Not the whole way through. I've seen part of it on TV, but not the whole way through. I need to get like the DVD and watch the whole thing.
I'll tell you what. Hey, Ben, you give me your address. I'll send you the 3 DVD set because I just got all 5 films on Blu-ray for Christmas.
Okay, you want to get rid of it?
I have no reason to keep the DVDs anymore. Well, very little reason anyway.
Now, admittedly, number 5 does start creeping back up into epic Schwarzenegger territory because Bruce Willis has.
Number 4 does too.
Well, number 4 still managed to retain the story thanks to Justin Long and his whole. That's what makes you that guy. That whole little speech, that scene, that makes it worth watching.
Though. Very much downplayed.
But the point we're making it. I mean, I'm channeling Nick Frost right now. I'm sorry. It's like you ain't seen Die Hard 2. It takes the concept of the everyman and the concept of the over-the-top epic action hero and melds them into something that gives you what you want. It's about a guy trying to reconnect with his family who's having a really bad day.
Okay.
So you can still do in video games, death becomes meaningless, but it doesn't automatically destroy violence as a tool. It just means you got to be creative with how you use it. There are still video games that can make it work. Or you've got to do what
hatred does and just, if it's not working, dump 10 more tons of it into your project and hope for the best.
Yeah.
But look at the impact that Doom had. You remember Doom?
Oh, yeah.
Right. Shotgun to the face. That was really compelling in, what was it, 1994? 93?
94, something like that.
Yeah.
Right. Shotgun to the face. That was a big deal because no one had seen that before. Gibbs flying everywhere. I mean, it was metal, okay? Or gibs, whatever they're called.
For giblets.
Yeah, I think the Doom guys pronounce it Jibs, but the actual community tends to pronounce it Gibbs.
Really? You're the only person I know that calls it that.
Well, anyway,
go ahead.
The point was that
It's very compelling.
You couldn't make that today. You couldn't make a game like Doom today. Doom 3 did not have any kind of the same...
I disagree, because they just made a remake not too long ago of Shadow Warrior, which was also very much like that. They got Duke Nukem Forever out finally.
Yeah.
None of those have anything like the impact that Doom had, and I mean
no, of course not, because at the time
the psychological
it was so new
impact,
and so shocking. Yeah,
yeah, but the thing is, they you can't get that kind of violence in video games cannot even have the kind of impact that it had on Doom. In Doom, because it's been used so much.
Right.
That's my point. It's been used so much that it no longer can have that same kind of impact.
Oh, it just has to have a different kind of impact.
We'd have to wait a while. What I mean is that same quantity of impact psychologically in the viewer. We'd have to wait a while, like, before we could have anything like that again.
See, but sometimes you got to go, it's not about quantity. I mean, yeah, Doom seemed shocking, but I mean, at the same time, I mean, if the gun no longer impresses people, you use a car to take out a helicopter. There's always a way to change things and change the quality of it. I mean, violence is not dead.
There was actually a game made for the Atari 2600 called the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yes, based on the film. And yes, your character in it, you played Leatherface, and you had the chainsaw, and you would literally cut people with the chainsaw, or maybe you were trying to get away from them. I can't remember which it is. And if you caught up with you would see blood spurt on the screen. That was a very gory game, and it was on a 2600.
I bet half the people who played that wouldn't even know which it was after playing it, because that's how bad the Atari 2600 is.
Yeah, I agree the graphics are bad, but you could tell that's what was happening. Person was getting cut in half and blood was spurting out. My point is, that was a very graphic game for its time. And let's not even go down the road of the Atari 2600 porno games.
I know, right? I've been actually working on an Atari 2600 game.
Porno?
No, that's the thing. Everybody who hears you doing that wants to know whether it's a porno game, and I'm like,
really?
What the hell? What kind? I mean, that wasn't even important enough in the history of video games commercially to merit the amount of attention it's gotten. I mean, anyway,
we've gotten really off topic again. From VR to violence in games.
Yeah,
now.
what is that? What is that Rule 34B? If it exists, there is a porno version of it for the Atari 2600.
And it strangely enough, the Angry Video Game Nerd reviews those too.
Oh no,
I
don't even like that guy.
If he's still angry afterwards, I think he's doing it wrong. But that's just me.
He's just.
His video game kind of sucks too.
Well, you're judging it by his video game. You hadn't even watched him, I don't think.
And now we've started a feud with somebody who has more fans than we do. We are so dead. Yeah, we're gonna get a first-hand taste of what video game violence is like. Guess what?
I have nothing but respect for James Roll, which is his real name. But yeah, I mean. He definitely reviewed those back years ago, and he wasn't angry at them. He was just kind of flabbergasted that they even existed. And he does review them from the point of view of, does it play well and so forth, or what kind of a game, is it worth playing and so forth. And of course, overwhelmingly, the answer is no. We're getting way off topic.
So, virtual reality.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, the concern that I have with virtual reality is, I guess, the physicality of it. How would that work? Because how far is that screen from your eyes? It's like as far as my glasses are, so it's or a little bit further. So if I try to focus on a bit of dust on my glasses for like an hour, that's going to do some serious straining.
That's very possible that just the physicalities of VR might make it prohibitively inconvenient physically for just way too many people. And you have enough bad stories like that going around, it could really kill the market for it too. So this is a huge concern to the people who are dumping money like drunken sailors on this tech.
Well, there's always been discussions in the past, even before virtual reality stuff, about how much time you should spend looking at a television in one sitting and take breaks, 15-minute breaks or whatever, every 30 minutes, whatever it is. I don't know. If you look up anywhere online, ergonomics, you're going to find this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure they're going to come up with the exact same stuff just for VR too, and it may be the same.
And then everybody's not going to follow it.
Exactly. No one does ever.
Right.
But I feel that with virtual reality, because it's so close, you say don't sit too close to your TV screen. Who sits from their TV screen apart from like 4-year-olds? But with virtual reality, because it's so close, the problems might even be augmented or even be greater than with a computer.
And at the time, televisions and computer screens were cathode ray tubes. They were literally shooting photons directly at you. Granted, they were stopped by a phosphor-coated screen, but still they were shooting light directly at you. Today's LCD screens, and they are all LCD now that plasma's out of the game, they don't do that. Granted, they have fluorescent lights or sometimes LED lights behind them that light them up, but they're not shooting these things directly at you anymore. So I'm not sure that it's exactly the same sort of problem as we've had in the past.
Well, I know that I can get eye strain from looking at an LCD screen for too long.
You can get eye strain from staring at anything for too long.
Yeah, from staring at a book for too long. That happens to me as well, yeah. But the ergonomics in general, though, is a valid concern to have. Maybe not as a health risk, but just as will VR be fun? There was somebody online who wrote, I don't remember who, but it was really witty, I thought, and it was, you want to get ready for VR? You want to know what VR is going to be like? Try duct taping a brick to your face.
That's about the extent of it.
Do you think that VR ought to be a dead end? I mean, is it a logical progression in the technology, or should we skip it and go for the picture walls from Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451 and take another step towards getting actual holodecks? Because that's what we all want.
I wonder how many people have actually read that.
Well,
I mean,
I have.
Thanks to me, at
awesome.
least 3 other people will read it, because we have 3 people listening, and they will say, "What, Fahrenheit 451? What, that Michael Moore movie? No, I'm talking about the real book that gives you all sorts of crazy stuff about the future, man, and about freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and freedom of ideas."
One of the great 20th century dystopias. Yeah.
Ranks right up there with the United Federation of Planets.
Oh, dystopias. Oh, wait. No. Yeah, I get it now. But what I meant was dystopian novels. There's a canon of them, 1984, Animal Farm, That Hideous Strength, Atlas Shrugged, and Brave New World.
Fahrenheit 451.
Right. That's pretty much the canon right there.
Even in a way, the Asimov's original Robots trilogy, Caves of Steel.
Is that dystopia, really? Well, I guess it's a sort of dystopia. It's not as much of a political dystopia.
No, it's a social dystopia. It's cramming in 5 million people into 1 million people's worth of space, and then adding 3 million robots to be the second-class citizens in the same space. It's an interesting look at.
Yeah, but I don't know if I'd put it in the canon of 20th century dystopian novels. It's more like a 20th century sci-fi, and it'd probably be in the top 10.
1960s or 70s movie called ZPG, I think. zero population growth, where it's like Earth is overpopulated. Yeah, 1972. It's a British film. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Don't mind me.
Okay, next step to VR. Well, we are not, as far as I know, all that much closer to those kinds of holograms. The closest thing in the market currently to that is Cast AR, which is the project that is coming out of the former Valve people. And what in Cast AR is a sort of different than your normal augmented reality. What you have is you have this white like sheet or surface, and then you wear goggles that are basically just regular old glasses, or not even any glasses. It's just a headband that has projectors on it, which project an image onto the white surface in front of you, like on the table in front of you, which then send signals back to your eye. I mean, by bouncing off the white surface so that it looks like a three-dimensional image to you. And as you move your head, what the projectors project changes so that you can look at things from different angles. Very, very clever technology.
Maybe something akin to some of those little gimmicky games for the Nintendo 3DS and its camera.
I haven't seen all that many really exciting apps for it, other than Tabletop Simulator. So
yeah, I'm looking at Google Images. I'm looking at Google Images right now, and it's got the Cast AR, and it's got a picture of the Leia hologram from the first part of Star Wars.
Right, that's the basic idea of the Cast AR right there.
Of course, I think we all know which Leia hologram all the fans will actually be watching. And there's probably a version of it on the Atari 2600.
They'll probably reboot Star Wars by the time this thing finally hits the market and have a different actress playing Princess Leia.
But I mean, I think virtual reality would be great if you could have something sort of, I guess, less cumbersome, and B, have the ability to look into the middle distance.
So you're thinking maybe that Google Glass thing where it's more of a heads-up display kind of superimposed over what you see?
That's also what Microsoft's HoloLens is going to do. I can see a lot of practical applications for augmented reality, but I can't really see it driving games.
Laser tag, dude, I'm telling you.
Well, the thing is, it's just not portable enough for laser tag in the current technology. If we get there to where it is reliable and cheap and portable and has a good network connection absolutely everywhere and popular enough, then we might start to see that. But it would have to be...
given how so many people who have Google Glass tend to annoy those who don't by wearing it in public in situations that might not ought to be worn, I think you've automatically got a desire to be popular. Here's a way you can shoot anyone wearing Google Glass. Just download the laser tag app and shoot away.
Well, that's not going to happen.
Those people are otherwise known as glass holes.
Thank you. That's the phrase.
Yeah, I think I think the wearing a Google Glass in a place where it's not supposed to be worn has less to do with the Google Glass and more to do with being a twat.
Yes, thank you.
Walking into the bathroom.
Would you like to be able to shoot them even virtually? Come on. You whip out your gun, you blast them, their ratings go down.
Well, because it's voice controlled, you could just walk up to them and say,
bang bang.
Open. No, just walk up to them and say, okay, Google, open browser, search poop images only and top 1,000 hits and do not stop or something like that, where it'll only show those images. They won't be able to stop it or something.
I can't see that sort of happening either.
There's some sort of command you can do.
There are interesting possibilities with geocaching adding an element to augmented reality, or maybe augmented reality would add something to geocaching, which is another
yes, I think it will.
Interesting.
But I can't see that becoming a mainstream hobby.
Not by itself, but I think AR by itself won't be mainstream. Geocaching won't be mainstream, but if you put both of them together, I think you might end up with something pretty nifty where people are actually doing what philosophers always want them to do, and that's looking at the world around them in a different way.
You need a really good marketing team to sell that, I have to say. It sounds like fun, but I'm an Eagle Scout, so regular people probably wouldn't buy it unless you market it really well. What I can see AR doing really well is practical applications. Like you're trying to fix something and the person who knows how to fix it isn't there with you, but they can be there with you and can see what you're seeing and can draw like a circle around the thing that you need to
like you see
fix.
On that Microsoft HoloLens demo reel.
That demo, I mean, the other demos are, crap. I mean, it's just, whatever, developers.
Yeah, I agree. That one has some excellent practical applications.
But the practical applications of that Skype demo actually, changing how we work, I think makes just a big difference. That might drive adoption of the system by businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be a game changer as far as technology goes.
We'll have to see. All right, I think probably about now is a good time, unless anyone has any final thoughts or words to add. We should probably draw this to a close.
Okay.
Anywho, folks, you should never look at your computer screen for more than an hour without taking a little 10, 15-minute break. So by the time you take your break, we're going to be gone. Because it's been another exciting night for us, but it's time to wrap things up. Thank you for tuning in, downloading, and checking us out. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, check us out on Instagram. Are we on Instagram yet?
Get on Instagram, Ben.
Isn't it just pictures? We don't really have pictures. We're more of a sounds kind of thing.
I want to have a picture. If a tree falls in a forest and it doesn't make a sound, if a tree falls in a forest and you take a picture of it, does that imply there's a sound? You were there to hear it. But anyway, no. Okay, so no Instagram yet. We're going to work on that. Sonogram, is that the sound equivalent of Instagram?
SoundCloud, but they don't give enough space for podcasts. We're on YouTube. It's good enough.
There we go. We're on YouTube.
And iTunes.
Now there's a slogan. YouTube. Good enough. So, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, check us out on YouTube, download us from the iTunes App Store, and we have an Android footprint now as well.
We're not in the iTunes App Store.
We're just in the iTunes Music Store.
We're in their podcast.
We're in their iTunes podcast store. Well, we're infiltrating the cult however we can. Anyway, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, check us out from iTunes where we're at.
Watch us on YouTube, and you'll see all of the nothing.
Yes, it's a very zen video. Tune in next week, same Trekkie time, same Trekkie channel.
2 weeks.
Keep on trekking. Trek them if you got them.
Just about everything Bill says this time has just been... This is like the inaccurate outro.
So misinformed.
We're sitting there. I remember Pong, and now you guys have the Facebooking and the tweet picking, and
like video game
I want my
Alzheimer's.
Pong back. I want my Pong back.
You could probably Google Pong and find it somewhere.
Like us on
sure.
Facebook, follow us on Twitter, check us out in the iTunes store. And check us out on the new Atari 2600 version of the game coming out soon. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Say no more, say no more. And send us an email, trekosophy@gmail.com. Let us know your questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, and applications, because, for God's sake, they keep having me do the intros, and you see how bad it goes. We need a fresh voice. Tune in next week as we delve into another deep issue. Who's the better cook, Riker or Cisco? Thank you and good night. You can't always get what you want. And we'll understand if you add 30 seconds of the sound of you banging your head against the desk as you try to edit this. We all thought it was funny back then. I swear to God, the entire nation was stoned. Avery Brooks is the only guy that made it all the way to the end of that road Jack Kerouac was always talking about. And when he got to the end, he kept right on going. The road to hell is paved with Apple products. I've got those two meshed together now, and all I'm thinking is, Cisco in the box, it's Cisco in the box. What a horrible planet, they put Cisco in a box. Oh boy, we are so fired. Spice, the final frontier. These are the meals of the Starship Enterprise, its continuing mission to seek out new cuisines and new civilizations. To boldly eat where no Trekkie has eaten before. Boy, we just went really, really... This is why they're right. All those crazy people were right. Video games rot your brains. We were just talking about it, and look what happened to us. What was the name of that episode where Riker brought the little video game on board that took over everybody's mind?
That was the game.
There you go.
What? When was this?
Wow, do you even watch Star Trek, bro?